Okay, I'm Ben Shelley, and in this tutorial we're going to set up a very simple studio lit scene. We're going to go from setting up the shaders of a phone like this right through to the lights and the render settings with as few clicks as possible and without going into any detail really. We can also set up a camera for a slightly more close-up view, ready to do a depth of field pass later on. We go into our Maya scene. Everything is completely unshaded. It's all just plain Lambert 1. So previous tutorials would have shown you how to create a phone or electronic device just like this. Before we go into setting up the shaders for this, we need to create a basic studio backdrop for this electronic device. So a simple ground plane just won't be enough, because when the camera gets quite low down, we're going to see the end of the ground plane coming into view. When people do product photography, they'll usually put the product in a small light box, and with nice curved edges at the back corners and things like that. So you can't really see where the box ends, but you might notice some variations in the shading of it. So I'm extruding out my background plane here. Okay, and pull that one out over there for the ceiling. It's important that you do have a ceiling as well, or a roof to it, because that's going to reflect in the phone screen. We're going to need to make it really quite wide, so just resize that out like this, and we're probably going to need to cover up these edges as well. So I suppose we could have used part of the inside of a cylinder, but we could just go around like this and just extrude. That'll do. No one's ever going to see around there now. So then once you've done that, just hit 3 and you should see something like that will be fine. So yeah, we've got this set up. The only other geometry that we need to create now for this is light to reflect in the screen of the phone. So we're going to create 2 small rectangles like this, and then just pull them up. The very first material, actually, we noticed that we're going to need to see these underneath. So just rotate these around so that you can see the correct faces. I'm actually pointing down like that. Okay. We're going to assign a surface shader to this. So right click, assign new material, and we're going to go to Maya materials, go down to surface shader, and just rename it to surface shader white, and drag the out color to pure white, and just resize that a bit, and just stretch it right out to cover the whole of the ceiling up there. And we're probably going to need 2 of these. If you have any more lights like this, if your phone screen will probably end up looking like a zebra crossing or something, just have two great big fat lights like that. But you can always add more later on if you really want. But that's all the geometry we really need to create for a studio lighting scene. And we're going to have to play around with those later. In fact, while we're here, let's just rotate these slightly like this, just so they're not completely perfectly lined up with the phone in the renders. That should look quite good. Okay, so if I hit 4, my scene looks something like this from above. Alright, so next we need to hit 6 on the keyboard so we can start to see what the shaders are going to look like. Let's select absolutely everything, including the floor plane, and this is just to make sure I don't leave anything as Lambert 1 by mistake, because you'll be able to tell straight away in the final renders if there's any Lambert 1 objects left behind. They'll be very bright and look really rubbish. So select absolutely everything, and we're going to assign our first mental ray material to it, and then we can change materials after that as well. So let's go assign new material, and we're going to go to mental ray materials here. Just incidentally, if you can't see this here, and also when you go into render settings, you can't see mental ray in the drop down menu, you will have to go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and scroll down. Probably near the bottom there's going to be a Maya tomr.mll. You need to make sure you've got loaded and auto loaded on that, and hit close, and then you should see mental ray materials pop up in here. So go ahead and go to MIA_material X passes. I suppose it doesn't really matter if we have passes or not on this, but just to be safe, just choose passes. So we've assigned that, and straight off the bat, nothing's going to be too impressive. We need to go to, obviously click on the material here. We're going to name it. This will be the most common material on our phone, which happens to be a shiny metal. So I'm just going to call this metal underscore grey. And the quickest thing to do, that we could obviously go into all of these settings here and choose and customize all of these values. But the point of this tutorial is to see how much we can do with as few clicks as possible. So we go to presets. Many people would use a chrome material, but the reflections will be perfectly clear, and I want some nice blurry reflections in our metals. So we're going to go down to actually use copper, because this seems to work really well straight off the bat. So go to copper and go to replace. And now everything's become this copper color, which is not what we want. So we just have to make sure the diffuse is, we click on the color under diffuse, make sure it's not got any color to it. And I'm just going to maybe make it a tiny bit darker, something around there. I can lighten it later if I want. And you also have to go to the reflection and make sure you drag and desaturate the reflection as well. And you can maybe make that a little bit, well, somewhere around there would be fine as well. Okay. So you're probably going to want to test this now and just see what this looks like. But we still have to set up some lights. So, and we're going to start comparing things. So when you set up lights, there's going to be lots of comparison renders that we're going to have to do. So this is a stage that you're really going to need to make sure you set up a camera. So go to Create, Cameras, Camera, and go to Panels, Perspective, Camera 1. And then just pan and zoom out so you can see where your phone is again. If you can't see what's going on, just hit this button here, which is the wireframe on shaded, and you should be able to see what's going on here. So I'm going to want to actually get this view of my phone here. So I'm going to rotate the background so that we can see this side. That'll do. So we can never really see off the screen now. So I'll just get a view roughly like this to start with, and I'd like to do. I'm going to have to come back in and do lots of comparison renders. So let's make sure that we get the camera set up to a good view to start with. So, okay, just to make sure that we know what the camera is going to be seeing when we render it, click on the resolution gate button here, and then you'll be able to see exactly what the camera will see. And if you at this stage you've got a square resolution gate appearing or something stupid, just go to render settings and make sure that you've got HD in under the common tab. Just make sure you go to image size, and HD 540 should be set there, and you can close that off. Okay, next we're going to add some lights. So we're going to go to create lights, and we're going to use some area lights like this. So the moment you click on a light, it will pop up in the middle of your grid. So just hit W and move that out of the way. Once you've created a light, you'll see a little line up coming away from it like that. That is telling you what direction the light's facing. I'm going to need to move my camera around in a minute, but I'm quite happy with the view that I've got here. I could obviously spacebar out and assign a perspective view to another pane, so I could sort of pan around. I could see the camera over here as well. But let's say I'm too lazy to even press a spacebar every time I want to see what the camera can see. So we can actually spacebar back into camera 1. And we can go to View, Bookmarks, go to Edit Bookmarks, and just click New Bookmark, and we can just call this like Main View if you really want to name it, and hit Close. And now, if you do move the camera to get a different view, go to View, Bookmarks, and you should see Main View there, and the camera will snap back to that view, which is really useful. You could obviously lock the camera and keyframe it or whatever you want, but that's another way of doing it. So let's move this light. So the scale of these lights does have an impact, so something around that size, just a bit, you know, the same size as the width of the phone or something, and move that up and out of the way. I might make it just a bit bigger. Okay, So we're going to have a main sort of white light coming from the top, like this. Actually, I'll move it just down to there, just so we get a bit of an angle on the phone. And we're going to do Control D and move this one to around about the side view here, like this. And I'll just pan that down like that. Okay. The intensity of these lights is a bit bright at the moment. We could go into the decay rate and stuff, but again, if we just want to be really quick, we can drag the color down till it's gray or something like this. Not quite as intense, and that should do. I also want to have some colored lights here as well, so I'm going to duplicate that light on the top and move it somewhere just over there. Maybe could be pointing this way a bit or something, but something like that will do. And I'm going to change the color of this to a nice blue color, something like that. Again, I don't want it to be too apparent, but let's just see how this looks for the time being, like this. And you can duplicate that, and I'm going to have another one just close to the front of the phone here. The base of the phone there, sorry. Resize that down somewhere around there, and then just I have no idea how this is really going to look, so this is why we have to now go ahead and render this. So if we bring up our render view first, and then just make sure you're rendering from Mental Ray, not Maya software. You can also access this from the render settings. Make sure you're using Mental Ray from up there. You might also want to tell it to start rendering in a TIFF, and also to use camera 1 and close that off. Okay, and then just hit your render button and wait until it's finished. Okay, so this is the very first render that we get with the default render settings in the Mental Ray, and we haven't added any different shaders to our phone, so we can see the quality is really low, but we can sort this out in a minute. I've also noticed my phone is hovering. I'm just going to sort that out really quick. Okay, so next thing I'll do is start to assign the different materials to different parts of the phone. So I'm going to select the, if I just select my whole group really quick, and then I can go to the, so that's the isolate select button there, and go to the screen at the top, and probably this is going to be glossy plastic underneath. That's probably it really. Anything that's plastic on my phone I'm just going to be selecting here, and that'll do for now. And I'm going to go to right click, assign another new material, go to Mental Ray materials, go to MIA material X passes, rename this glossy plastic, and go to presets and go to glossy plastic and hit replace. It'll come up with this beautiful beige color to start with, which I haven't seen any beige phones recently, so I'm going to make that black. Reflection I'm just going to make a bit brighter as well, like just off white, and maybe I can make this just off black a bit as well. That'll do. So just off black for that. And so and this phone, I think pretty much everything else is made out of the metal, so that'll do, I suppose. I suppose the only other issue would be the speaker gap here. We could use a texture for the very small holes you get there, but I'm actually going to model it because we're going to get very close down to some of these speaker holes here. So if you want to create, this isn't really part of the lighting stuff, but you may find that when you're assigning your materials and doing your renders, that you're not entirely happy with some parts of your object, and so you're going to have to start adding some stuff to it to make it better. So this is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm going to create something roughly about like that. I'm going to create a plane here with lots of very small holes in it. So we'll go to polyplane here and increase the subdivisions. I need to make sure they are kept square. Something like that will do. And then I'll just line the camera up from the top. I could probably just isolate, go to the top view. and then select that geometry, focus in on that, go to vertex, and then there's a little command here called chamfer vertex. Hold down shift, right click, chamfer vertex, and it will turn every vertice into a face like this. I need to select everything except those vertices, sorry, those new faces really quick, so that I can select these little diamonds a bit more quickly. So this is the fastest way I can think of selecting those diamonds, is to actually select everything else like this, and hold down shift, select it again, which will invert the selection. I'm just going to jump back to my 3D view here, and before I extrude, I'm going to go to poly chamfer 1, the history for that, and make them all a bit bigger, something like that, and then hit extrude, and just resize them in a bit. So if I click on that cube on the top, the cube in the middle, resize them down like this, hit G to repeat the extrude command again, and pull them, whoops, and pull them down like that. And then once you pull them down, hit delete. I don't really want to see the undersides of them. And also, if we hit 3, we can see this sort of cone off at the bottom. If you delete them, they'll stay cylindrical like that, and that's great. So now we've created a face here with lots of small holes. I'm going to assign a new metal material to that. So I'm going to assign new material, Mentor materials. I'm going to go to MIA material X passes again and call this dark, or metal dark. Presets, copper, replace. The color I'm going to make quite dark, desaturated, reflection, desaturated, and something like that will be fine. Okay, so I'm going to sling this inside the earpiece here. So that'll do, just sling that one in there. And I'm also going to duplicate that and maybe just sling it in behind the small speaker holes at the bottom here as well. I might need to duplicate this one. These are a bit wider because there's no headphone jack over here. I'll go to face and trim off all of that and just hit delete. And so that's nice and trimmed off now. Alright, so that's done. I'm probably going to need to add those to the phone group as well, just in case I choose to move it around again. So I could go into the outliner and add those to the group, or just hit Control G if you're really lazy. Okay, so that's fine. Alright, so I'm going to go back to my bookmarks main view. I'm going to make these coloured lights a bit more impressive as well. So if I get this coloured light here, sorry, this one there, maybe make it a bit more intense, move it in a bit like that. Same with this coloured one up here, maybe a bit more intense. I suppose I could move it down a bit or resize it or something. I also want these lights in the ceiling to be slightly different as well, so I'm just going to go ahead and group those. If I hit 4, I'd actually want the reflections to be maybe something like that will be fine. See how that looks. So I've rotated them to around something around there. Alright, let's go ahead and render this again. So just so we can do a comparison, just make sure you go to View, Bookmarks, Main View. Just keep this previous render here, and then go ahead and render again. If you render from here, it's probably going to render from the same view. I actually want it to render from this bookmark view. So I'll go up to here instead and render that. Okay, so this is the render that we've got now, so it's a bit nicer. So we've got like a nice glossy reflection here from the light in the ceiling, and it's got some interesting curvy bits here that are coming from the curved ceiling object as well. There's an issue here, the light's intersecting the floor, so we get this nasty line there. So if I just move that up. Also, if you hit 7 on the keyboard as well, you can see your light's actually having a real impact on your scene. So I'm going to move this up and out of the way like that, just so it's not quite as intense, and that should have fixed that. So some of these lights are still really quite bright, so I'm going to drag these down. That one especially needs to be dragged down, and then go back to your bookmark view again and hit render again. So before you render, make sure you hit this green button here to save your previous render, so we can already sort of compare a before and after. Obviously we've got the copper material and everything there, and we've got the screen material there. So let's see what this looks like now. Okay, so this is the render we have from that. If I just again compare it, we can see the blue lights are a bit more intense. We've got rid of that nasty line from down there. You'll most likely have to do lots of these test renders to get it working perfectly for you as well. I want to try and move these surface shader lights as well just a bit and see how that has an impact. So if I zoom out, maybe make them a bit thinner, and I'm going to move them both just a bit, just back a bit like this. Alright, we can also just, if I keep that render, do a quick slice across the render view like that, just by clicking and dragging. We can render a small snippet and see how this looks. That's great. So I'm happy with how far in that light goes, and I can see it's already that the floor's a lot darker now that I've made those smaller. So if I just render that off as its own thing. Okay, so now the render's finished, we can see that this is the latest one here, and if I compare the before and after, I get darker areas on the left and right, and it sort of frames the image in a much more nicer way. I'm still keeping these glossy reflections on here. My only main issue now is that we've made some of the lights smaller. On the left here, it gets very, very dark. So one last thing to do is maybe to add a light or move something around. So I can maybe duplicate this light here, move it down around there, and just see how this looks. If I go back to my bookmark. Okay, and so for the final render, I've gone onto the floor material here, gone to assign existing material and assign that dark metal material. And if you go to your material settings over here, it was just a general copper material with the color made to be this dark and the reflection that color there. And in the final render, we should be able to see the difference. The phone does stand out a bit better on the floor, and the outer areas are a lot darker as well. I'm quite happy with that view, that final render that we have there. So let's go ahead and up the render settings if you're completely happy with the view. This may be a good time as well if you're animating the camera to get that set up while the settings are still at this quality, and make sure that the beginning and end frames are something that you're happy with, and then go ahead and batch render that. Obviously there's separate tutorials on how to do that. For now, let's go and get these render settings done. So click on your render settings button here or over there, and the simplest things that we need to make sure we do: image format should be set to TIFF. We need to make sure we're using mental ray up here. Renderable cameras, make sure you're rendering from camera 1. Preset, we're going to up this now to HD 720, and then we can go over to quality. In quality, at the moment it's 0.25. You can still see that each render does take about a minute to do. If you up this to 1, just type in 1 in there, you're still going to notice quite a lot of this noise, especially in materials that should be smooth, like a glossy phone screen. So unfortunately, we're actually going to have this up this to 2. And there's more efficient ways of doing it by going in and changing a whole lot of other settings, but the unified sampling method is the simplest way really of upping the render quality. But it's going to take about 20 minutes probably to render with the quality set to 2, and maybe about 10 minutes or 12 minutes for the quality set to 1. So once we hit render, now would be a good time to go and do the dishes or something like that. And before you render it, just keep your this image so you can see the improvement in quality as well. So go ahead and render the current frame with these new settings. Okay, so this is the final render. We can still see there's a bit of noise left behind, but it's fine. I'm happy with it. Make sure you keep it there and save this image out properly. So this is going to be just save that out properly, or phone upper view or something like that. Really quickly, if you want to put something on the phone's screen here, there's a few ways of doing it. We could set up a new render layer, but I want to just make sure we keep this separate. So I'm going to do it in the display layer. I'm actually going to duplicate this phone screen and assign it to a new layer, which I will call phone screen. And in the future, if we ever want to just render it on its own, we could, if I just turn that new phone screen off. Okay, so if I select everything, including my lights and all of that, so just zoom right out, select absolutely everything, make sure your phone screen layer is off, and click Assign to New Layer, and just call it Phone. Okay, and you can then turn that off, and everything's turned off, and just turn your phone screen on. Again, if you go to View, Bookmarks, Main View, this will be the exact same view. So I'm going to assign a new surface shader to this. So assign new material, assign a surface shader, which is just there. I'm just going to delete everything that's not the actual lit screen of the phone. So I'm just going to create a new edge loop round about there where I'm guessing the screen's going to end. If I just, and another edge loop for where I think the bottom end of the screen will be. So this is the actual lit screen, like the OLED part here. And I'm going to create, I'm going to move these and these up as well. Nice big image like that, that'd be fine. So I'm going to select the faces here that make up the actual lit part of the screen and hold down Shift and delete everything else. And then we can, on the surface shader material, surface shader 3, just click on the out color for that and go to File and choose a file here. Yeah, so it's my phone screen. So you can have whatever you like on the phone screen here. Make sure you go to Automatic Mapping and go to your UV texture editor, and let's bring that over here a bit. So sometimes the UV texture editor looks really nasty. All you really want to do is make sure that you just drag out the geometry to be the same size as this textured part of the UV editor here. And I'm obviously need to rotate it like this. So obviously make sure you use those rotate tools there. And that looks like it's about the right size there. I might want to trim off some of these edges if I want, like that. And just making sure from the top it looks about right. So yeah, I'm going to say that'll do. I probably should have done a UV snapshot of the screen width and dragged it into Photoshop to make sure I get it exactly right. But that looks like it's going to work. So you've got your phone image on there that's now just been mapped on properly, and just make sure that we can turn it on and off when needed as well. But we want to render this phone screen separately from the phone itself. So just go back to your bookmarks, to your main view, and go ahead and render that off. So make sure you've saved in here, make sure you've saved this beautiful image, and just hit render again, which should leave you with this, which is going to fit exactly over the top of the phone, either in Photoshop or After Effects. This same principle obviously works for animations as well. So if you're rendering off an animation, we'd render off one animation, which should look like this, with nothing showing on the phone, and a separate batch render of just the screen on its own like this. And we're now going to overlay this in After Effects just to show you how we do it. So if we open up After Effects, go to your project and just start to import your images in there. Whoops, I was going to save this back out of Maya Quick. So save that as, make sure you save it as a TIFF. I'm just going to call this, alright, phone screen like that. Now we go into After Effects and we can drag in your phone render and the phone screen, and if you just drag this, same thing can be done in Photoshop as well, but just for After Effects we can just drag the phone into there or create a composition that's the right size. Mine happens to be 4 seconds long. Obviously this is really just a still image, but if it was for a video, this is what we'd have to do. So you've got your phone screen over the top like this. Okay, so the biggest reason for rendering these two off separately, you would have noticed how quickly it rendered off the surface shader, because it doesn't have any lighting or shading or shadow information at all. So if a client was to ask you to change what was on the screen of the phone there, then you could just render that straight back off in an instant and update it without having to spend 20 minutes rendering off the phone again. And so to make this look like it's going to be on the screen with the reflections going over it and everything like that, we're going to use the blending mode. Same thing in Photoshop, just go to your blending modes. After Effects, it's layer blending mode. And there's actually a blending mode called screen, so it's obviously built for this purpose. And obviously when the screen's on, even the darker parts are going to be illuminated, and so it will appear brighter than the rest of the phone, and also we can see the reflections are now going over the top of it. And so if this was an animated texture on an animated phone, this is what we could be doing, but this looks absolutely fine like that. So we've now got our phone, and we can do whatever we like with the screen and easily change it to any other image we like as well in After Effects. Okay, finally we're going to set up the phone view from quite low down. So turn this all back on. I'm going to go to create cameras and create another camera and look through that camera there, and I'm going to get quite close to here. Now we're going to have a nice depth of field blur on this, which will be in a separate tutorial, but we just set it up so we've got a nice, a really good view where we can see things that are fairly far away and things that are fairly close at the same time. Now something like this would work quite well. At this point it might be well worthwhile changing the focal length of the camera. So to bring up the camera attributes, just click on this button here, the camera attributes button. Make sure you're in camera shape 2. The angle of view is going to be probably, I think, should really be around 50 or 40 or something like that. So angle of view I'll just set to 40. The focal length, I'm going to set it to a 50 mil there. And you may just notice the difference if you decrease this number. So like a wide angle lens would be, you know, around 10 to 16 millimeters like that. You can see it has a much a bigger sort of sense of perspective on that, which is pretty good. But the things that are far away are going to be too small to even notice. And if also if we're this close to the phone, we may actually, the camera taking the picture would probably be zooming in a bit. So 50 mil would probably be a good focal length to go at with angle of view around 40 like that. So it looks something like this now, which means things far away are only a little bit smaller really than things close up, and you can obviously change that down if you want as well, but something like that would be fine, 45 or 50. Okay, and just try and get it so it fills up the screen, and go ahead bookmark that view and render that off. Okay, so my rendered view of the base of the phone looks something like this. Okay, and the next tutorial we're going to go into setting up a depth pass in Maya.